Do you know why so many men today choose to stay single instead of getting married? This question has been following me for years. Through wedding halls, divorce courts, and quiet Friday nights. I am not talking about young men on dating apps. I am talking about men like me. Men who built a life, paid the mortgage, raised kids, and still woke up one day wondering why they felt like a stranger in their own home. I was at a country club last spring, watching a second wedding, soft lights, a jazz trio, the same promises I once made, till death do us part. The bartender slid the tab toward me, and for a second, I saw my past in that thin strip of paper. Numbers, service fees, and a line for gratuity. The price of a promise. Neatly itemized. People still say half of marriages end in divorce. But that old number is no longer true. The divorce rate today is lower than it was a decade ago. Yet the cost of ending a marriage has never felt higher. 2 apartments where there used to be one. Attorney letters that arrive like bills from a hospital you never visited. A college tuition bill that does not care which parent kept the house. And for a man in his 50s, it's a look at the 401k statement feels like opening someone else's wallet. Stay with me to the end. And then decide for yourself. I am not here to tell you to get married or to leave. I am here to tell you how a man like me walked away from the idea of marriage as a default setting. Not from love. From the script. My name is Mark. I'm 25. Operations manager at a logistics company off I-71. I drink my coffee black. And I talk to my son every Sunday. 19. A freshman at the state university. He texts me pictures of the campus gym and the cafeteria pizza like they're equal miracles. I pay what I can. When I can. He knows that. We don't keep score. I married young. It worked late. He paid the mortgage. And said yes to the life we were supposed to build. Most of it was beautiful. Some of it was hard. And a few parts were quietly breaking me. If you've lived long enough, you know this truth. Love is not the hard part. Keeping yourself alive inside the life you built together is the hard part. Money showed the first cracks. Not one big disaster. A wedding here. A new car there. The kitchen upgrade. The therapist co-pays. The surprise tax bill. The cousin's destination wedding. We could not afford but somehow did. Our checking account became a revolving door. And when divorce finally arrived, the legal letters felt like invoices from a world I never agreed to enter. Some research says divorce can cut a man's net worth by 3/4. For me, it cut time. It cut focus. It cut the man I wanted to be into smaller, more affordable pieces. By the time the county court stamped the papers, I was an expert in forms and a beginner in my own life. I am not angry at my ex-wife. We were young and hopeful. We did our best with the tools we had. But I was not prepared for the emotional labor that crept into every corner of the day. Not just hers. Mine too. We turned each other into project managers of one another's moods. A meeting that never ended. Minutes no one approved. At the country club that night, the jazz trio hit a standard from the 90s. The groom laughed too loudly. The bride wiped an invisible tear. I lifted my glass. And all I could think about was how different the world is now. Weddings are bigger. Expectations are bigger. The bill is bigger. And the margin for a quiet man to keep his center, smaller. I left the reception before the cake. I drove past the dark windows of the strip malls, the lit aisles of the 24-hour grocery, the quiet houses where 1,000 small negotiations were happening in whispers. When I pulled into my driveway, I did not turn on the TV. I sat in the car and listened to the engine tick as it cooled. There are moments when a man hears his own life speaking. That night, mine said this: you can stay useful, or you can stay whole. Choose. The beginning of the end was not a fight. It was dinner, a small Italian place off Broad Street. Anniversary night. Candlelight between us. We ordered a bottle that we could not pronounce. She told me about the new curriculum standards. I told her about a truck that missed a dock time and a client who said the word unacceptable 5 times. We were both tired in the honest way that happens when 2 people do their best for too long. Then dessert came. Tiramisu. 1 fork. A dusting of cocoa that looked like a map of somewhere we had never been. She said, "We need to talk about your priorities. Not harsh. Not cruel. just a sentence that had lived too long in her chest. I heard a list that night. Time, presents, vacations with her parents, weekend with her sister's twins, the therapy I kept postponing, the promotion I kept chasing. I heard in my own voice things I did not want to hear. Not now. Maybe next quarter. Let me get through this week. The server placed the check between us. I saw the subtotal first, then the tax, then the tip line, like a dare. I signed my name and felt, for the first time, like an ATM with a pulse. Not because she asked, because I no longer knew how to be anything else. We tried counseling. We tried date night. We tried putting our phones in a drawer. What we never tried was asking the only question that mattered. What happens to a man when his life becomes a never-ending task list to make other people comfortable? I am not saying men carry more. I am saying the way I carried it was killing me. I brought home a paycheck, and then I brought home whatever was left of me. Most nights. It wasn't much. After the divorce, the quiet felt like a crime at first. Friday nights were a calendar with nothing on it. Saturday mornings were a grocery cart with one set of preferences. Sunday was a diner that knew my name by the second week. Lonely. Sometimes. But the kind of loneliness that heals instead of the kind that hollows. The first time I sat in that diner alone, I brought a book from a box in the garage. Marcus Aurelius was sitting on top of Nietzsche. Like a strange meeting of ghosts. The sentences were short and seemed to know me. Become who you are. One of them said. Not an order. A permission. I stopped staying late to prove I deserved my chair at work. I stopped saying yes to every family obligation that drained me. I made a list of the only 3 things I must do each day. Lift something heavy. Call my son. And do one thing that was mine alone. Some days, it was reading 2 pages. Some days, it was cooking eggs at midnight. Some days, it was sitting in silence long enough to hear my own thoughts return. Slowly, I stopped feeling like a man in exile. I started feeling like a man rebuilding. And here is where the world became louder. Friends told me I was selfish. Her family said I was going through a midlife crisis. My own coworkers asked if I was seeing anyone yet. As if that was the finish line. I smiled, nodded, and kept stacking the small bricks of my new life. But one night, the phone rang. It was my son. He said, "Dad, I think I get why you left." He told me he had just watched a couple argue in the dorm parking lot for 20 minutes about who should drive home. He said, "It looked like a full-time job." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I knew he had just seen the thing I could never explain with words. When love turns into a shift you can't clock out of, something in you begins to fade. That call stayed with me. It was the moment the guilt I had been carrying loosened its grip. Maybe walking away wasn't quitting. Maybe it was the first responsible thing I had done in years. A month after that call, I cleaned out the garage. Among the paint cans and boxes of Christmas lights, I found my old bench press. The barbell was dusty. The plates scattered. I wiped it down and set it up again. First lift in years. The metal felt cold and honest. No negotiations. No compromises. Just weight and will. That night, I opened Nietzsche again. He wrote about the will to power. Not power over others, but over yourself. Over the part of you that wants the easy way. The soft compromise. The life that is safe, but small. I realized that the hardest thing I had done was not leaving a marriage. I decided to live a life that I could own without apology. So I started rebuilding. Piece by piece. I met with a financial planner. A woman my age who had seen every kind of money disaster you can imagine. We mapped out a plan: 401k contributions, an emergency fund, and tuition help for my son. For the first time in a decade, I saw numbers that belonged to me, not to a settlement or a shared account. It felt like breathing with both lungs. I did start dating again. Carefully. Coffee first. Always. No rushing. No paper rings around promises we cannot keep. I tell women early on, I am not against marriage, but I am for freedom. If what we build threatens to erase either of us, I would rather part as friends than sign up for a lifetime of slow resentment. Some appreciate the honesty. Some walk away. Either way, I stay whole. On Sunday mornings, I still go to the diner. The waitress knows my order now: black coffee. Eggs over easy. Wheat toast. I sit by the window. Watch families come in from church. Kids sliding into booths. Parents dividing pancakes. Sometimes I miss that chaos. Sometimes I am grateful it is not mine to manage anymore. Both can be true. And here is what I know now. Men are not walking away from marriage because they fear commitment. We have been committed to jobs, to mortgages, to kids, to parents who need us. We are walking away from the idea that our value lies in how much of ourselves we can give up before we disappear. We are not giving up on love. We are giving up on living half a life. People will say we are selfish. They will say we are afraid. Maybe they are right. Maybe we are afraid of losing the last years we have left to a version of ourselves we do not recognize. Afraid of looking back at 70 and seeing nothing but compromise where a man should have been. So I leave you with this. If you are sitting in a driveway tonight, engine ticking as it cools, I'm wondering when you last felt like yourself. This is your sign. Choose yourself, not at the expense of everyone else, but before everyone else. Fill your own cup. Then pour what overflows into the lives of those you love. That is what I tell my son now. Build a life you can live with. Then invite someone into it. Not to fix you, not to complete you, but to walk beside you as equals. And if no one ever shows up, live it anyway. Live it so fully that when the last song plays, you were not just there for the vows, you were there for the whole dance. So if you made it this far, you know my answer. I did not walk away from marriage because I hate women or because I could not handle commitment. I walked away because I finally saw the cost of living small, and I chose to be whole instead. If this story made you stop and think, drop a comment. Tell me your story. And if you are ready to hear more about money, kids, and finding peace after 50, subscribe. We are just getting started.